recap, we've been having this Bible study up in Old Town, Maine for the last, I'd say, about 10 weeks. And we've been going through a series called Encounters with Jesus. And this week we did John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. It's a familiar story. It's the story of the woman at the well. I'm not the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery. We did woman at the well a few weeks ago. But the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. Let me just retell the story to kind of set the stage, and then I'd like to talk about a couple points that came out of it as we talked about John chapter 8. John chapter 8 is when Jesus is teaching in the temple. He has some people gathered, and he's just minding his own business. And then the teachers of the law and some Pharisees show up, and they bring in a woman that they have said has been caught up in adultery. And so they say to Jesus, Jesus, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says that we need to stone her. What should we do? And they're, of course, asking this to try to trick Jesus. Jesus is aware of this. But instead of answering right away, he takes a moment. He bends down and writes in the sand and continues to write. And we don't really know what he wrote in the sand. The Bible doesn't say. But he was writing long enough that the teachers of the law had to keep asking, persisting, what should we do with this woman? So finally he stood up and he said to them, and this is, of course, a famous Bible verse, let the one of you, all of you listening, let the one of you who is without sin cast the first stone. And of course we know that, and then he bent back down and started writing in the sand again. And we know that one by one, the Jews and the teachers and everyone that had heard him just started to leave one by one, the older first to the younger, which is an important point, I think, until there was no one left. And then at that point, Jesus stood back up. He asked the woman, is there anyone left to condemn you? Her simple answer was, no one, Lord. And of course he says, and then neither do I condemn you. But he doesn't leave it there. She doesn't get a free pass. He says, now turn from your life of sin and go. So a lot of times we like to cite these verses as Jesus wasn't judging her. And I believe that it's clear that he was judging her, or he wouldn't have called her act of adultery sin. He just didn't condemn her, which is, of course, an important distinction. We can be condemned for our actions that are not honoring to God, but if we turn from them, we can be judged, we can be judged by our actions if they are not honoring to God, but we're not condemned by them if we turn from them and put our trust in Christ. So that's an important point that we got from it. The other thing I'd like to point out, a couple other things, is the fact that when he was asked the question from the Pharisees, what should we do? He didn't feel the need to get right back in their face and give them an answer like we tend to do. We tend to argue with people and be aggressive. He created some space, knelt down, wrote in the sand, kind of let them bring the question back up. Then he answered them. Of course, he didn't back down from his answer. He told them, you guys are all sinners too. Why don't you clean up your own mess before you start wanting to kill this woman, basically stone her. She would have been stoned to death. So that's another point. We should create space when we're in conversations and when someone's trying to trick us. You don't need to immediately have a response. Go in prayer, create some time, have some time before you respond. And another final point is, of course, when he told them, those of you who have not sinned, cast the first stone, and they left one by one, it was the older first. And I think that's, of course, people that have lived a longer life aren't as quick to start pointing out other people's problems. They've been through issues. They've been through problems their whole life. They've had possibly kids that have become prodigal kids, and they've prayed for them to come back to Christ. So they were more mature and wiser in their years and able to recognize what Jesus was saying first. Those people that are young and fresher in our faith, I used to count myself among these people, are more ready to tell people what they're doing wrong. Instead of taking a moment, they're ready to just get right up in their face. And us younger people, and now I'm not even that young anymore, but we got to be ready to create some space and to not point out people's sin when we haven't even gotten rid of our own sin. So that was pretty much what we all talked about. We had a real good conversation on learning the story and not just reciting from the Bible, but being able to retell the story, any Jesus story, any story in the Bible, but specifically stories from Jesus. And so that's what I did just here in this video, to try to retell the story in my own words. If I left anything out, or if you want to add to the conversation, feel free to leave some comments below. But let's call it good with that. Thanks.